before we bring jurors?
Just one matter, Your Honor. The second witness that we plan to call this afternoon is going to be Dr. Evans, Anne-Marie Evans. And my plan was, and I'm just bringing this up to see whether we need to do any type of procedure, was to do similarly, which is not to qualify her as an expert, but to talk about the things that she knew beforehand of that. And if that is going to be something that will also want to be subject to a voir dire, I just wanted to bring that to the court's attention. I know there's some different circumstances. The state does have her report. I do think as a result the court order has background information. They do not have, and I had just gotten it, as the only thing it doesn't have in that term is a resume, but as I said, it was not our intention to call her as an expert, but I do realize that there were some issues with that, and I just wanted to bring that to the court's attention rather than interrupt her testimony right after that.
What's the state's position on that?
We do have our report. I guess my concern is if it's just interactions with the defendant and kind of her observations of him. She does make some diagnoses in here, and I would submit if she's not been tendered as an expert, that might not be appropriate, because if she had been tendered as an expert, we could ask Your Honor for records related to the background. I know we have some of the educational records, but she makes reference to treatment facilities and other types of things that I think would have been fair game for the state to get. So I guess my position is I don't have any objection to her testifying. I think where it gets into the expert category is what her diagnosis of him is.
And I guess what I can just give a quick, what my intent to do with it, and I can certainly not ask what the diagnosis was again, sort of, did you diagnose serious mental health problems? Did you try to get him treatment with that and all, and other observations. The one other area which I think might be tricky that I will preview that I was going to do, well, would submit that I would be interested in doing, and would be talking about some of the things in the reports about things that she learned about the history about that, and I realize that may be a controversial subject about that. With it that's mentioned in the report, just that he'd gone to different facilities in the past and had been withdrawn, and a little bit that she knows about his background with it. And I was planning to touch on that, but I do realize, and we have an argument for that, but that may be the area of voir dire. I will stay away from the diagnosis with it. So that's, I just want to make the court aware of that, the state as well.
All right. My view is that I'm trying to find a consistent thread for rulings of this sort. We came across it earlier. The fact that Mr. Smith has been admitted to either hospitals or care facilities or schools, I think that fact is admissible. And I think the jury is entitled to know what those facilities are and the typical type of conditions that cause people to attend those facilities or schools. I think that's something that no expert is needed, but rather somebody that has knowledge of what his history was, and Dr. Evans may have that knowledge from prior to the point of her report. So I think that it does not take an expert to say, well, in my opinion, the right school is a school that is used for children that have emotional and developmental disabilities. Now, whether I realize that crosses into a suggestion that she is making a diagnosis, but in fact she's not. She's describing what the school is, and that's within her knowledge. It doesn't take an expert to know that. It's just somebody with knowledge, and she's permitted to talk about that. Where I think it certainly would be improper would be any diagnosis that forms a prediction of future behavior. That I think is certainly, unless you have an expert that is qualified to make that sort of opinion. I think
we were definitely not planning to do that.
I think awareness of, I think that in this context where the school records have been provided, that information that Dr. Wright is opining about is in her report, and there have been at least some of the records, school records, have been provided to the state. I think general discussions about what her understanding of the various diagnoses that the school system was aware of that were being taken into account in preparing an IED, I think that is also an appropriate area of questioning.
And one other area that is mentioned in the report, we also touched on, is that there references a report that some of those programs were things that he had been withdrawn from.
Right. Well, and that also is a fact, and I don't think that's an expert opinion. I think maybe it's hearsay, and I think that may be one of those instances where the rules of evidence not applying in this case, if it is reliable. If there is some indicia of reliability of what she is hearing, then I think that would be a standard that we should apply. We're not talking about speculation she may have as to why someone's withdrawn.
And it would be stuff that she relied upon not as an expert, but as part of her job and stuff like that.
Right.
So we have some belief that it is reliable as opposed to hearing it as hearsay or that.
Right. I think it's important to lay that foundation so that we're not simply in a situation where she's hearing a rumor that he was withdrawn for this reason or that reason, but rather that she's basing it on some reliable information, whether it's from a teacher or a parent or some other record. I think that would be important that be established.
And I would probably be showing her report as an exhibit as part of refreshing her memory, which she has relied upon.
All right, state want to be heard further. And we'll just, if there are other objections, then we'll take them up as we go along.
All right, thank you, Your Honor.
If you have, I think I gave you back my copy of that report. It'd probably be helpful for me to have another copy. If
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes, please.
Just make sure that I, in the end, have one. Okay, I want to make sure I had one.
All right, let's, anything else? Let's bring jurors. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Further evidence for the defense?
Yes, Your Honor, the defense calls Sherrod Holloway.
Do you solemnly swear the testimony you give this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you, sir. Please be seated.
Ms. Brown?
Mr. Holloway, could you please tell the jury your name?
Sherrod Holloway.
And how do you know Travion Smith?
I worked as a paraprofessional for Easter Seals at one point, and he was a client that they had, and I worked with him that way.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a little bit more in a moment about that.
Sure.
Just a little bit of background. Where do you live?
I live in Wake Forest, North Carolina.
And how long have you lived there?
07, maybe 05, 07.
Okay, 5 or 7 years?
About 7 years, yeah.
Okay. And where do you currently work?
Park West Barber School here in Raleigh.
Okay. And what do you do there?
My title is Campus Director,
And where did you go to college?
North Carolina Central.
And let's talk about the program that you knew Travion for. Could you explain more what that program was?
So sure, it was social work, and I was working part-time with that particular organization. And again, he was just one of the clients that they had, and they assigned his case to me.
And what sorts of things would you do? Would you be working with a group of kids? Would you be working one-on-one?
Typically it was one-on-one.
And do you know how you got referred to get Travion or any of your clients' cases?
Typically they'll assign it to you, and Travion just happened to be the I guess the luck of the draw for me when I ended up getting Travion.
And what sorts of things would you do in such a program with Travion?
So we were to work with behavioral children that had behavioral issues. So with Travion, I'll be honest, my style was to kind of just hang out. I was a barber, or I am a barber, excuse me. So I would sometimes take him by the shop to hang out with other men. We'd go play basketball. We'd go get pizza. Just kind of hang out and talk and try and, figure out some of the things that were going on with him.
Try to figure out. Do you remember how old Travion was at that time?
If I had to recollect, I'm thinking around the year of 2005, because I was still at the barber shop and on Capitol Boulevard at that time, and that's the shop that we were going to when we went by there.
So around 2005, he would have been 12 or 13 years old?
I would say probably 11, 12, yeah.
Do you remember if he ever had any type of hygiene issues?
So that was one of the reasons why I would take him by the shop sometimes. I wanted him to see other men get groomed. Sometimes I would, shampoo and cut his hair for him, just treat him like a little brother. And sometimes I would pick him up. His clothes might be not fitting, or sometimes it may not be washed. So sometimes you might smell foul at times. It just depends. That's pretty much it.
In your program, when you worked with other kids in this program as well, is that true?
Did I work with other kids? Yes, sir.
Would you oftentimes have a lot of contact with their family?
Yes.
Was it normal for you to have a lot of contact with persons?
And most times there would be an initial, just an introductory period. I'd go sit with the family, kind of tell them the things that we work on, and we'd have a conversation pretty much before I started to work with the kids.
Did you ever meet, in the course of working with Travion, ever meet his mother?
No.
His stepmother?
No. She was in the house, but I've never laid eyes or met her.
Did you have much contact with his father?
No, sir. I've probably run into him maybe twice. When I would go by to pick him up, he may be getting off work, he jumps out the truck, might speak, and he'd go in the house.
And that was different than with the other kids that you worked with?
Yes.
do you remember how long Travion was in the program?
I couldn't say. I may have worked with him maybe 5-6 months, maybe. But I believe I worked with him on 2 occasions because he was re-enrolled into the program again a second time, and they brought him back to me.
And
So-
how long did that last?
I don't recall.
Did both of them kind of end abruptly?
Yeah, yes, sir. I went to the house one day to get him, and no one came. I went back to the agency, and then they told me that they had stopped services.
If I may just have a moment.
Yes.
Thank you. No more questions.
Cross-examination?
Okay. And you said he was about 11 to 12. Do you know where he was going to school at the time?
I don't recall.
Okay. And when the family stopped services, you no longer had contact with Travion at that point?
Funny thing is, after services stopped, I don't know whose phone he would have. Sometimes he would just call me randomly from a phone just to say, hey.
So he would initiate contact?
He definitely would initiate contact.
But no reason was given other than the family stopped the services?
No, ma'am.
I don't have any further questions.
Anything further, Mr. Brown?
No, sir.
All right, thank you, sir. You may step down.
Thank you.
Place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right foot. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you, ma'am. Please be seated.
All right.
Mr. Brown?
All right. Thank you. Good afternoon, Dr. Evans. Could you please tell the jury your name?
Yes, I'm Anne Marie Evans.
And how do you know Travion Smith?
I served as the school psychologist at Longview School from the summer of 2001 until the summer of 2010, and then again for a year in 2012 and 13. Travion was a student at our school for 4 of those years. He spent his middle school years and into his 9th grade year as a student at Longview. I knew him in that capacity, and I came to know him more comprehensively when I was asked to do a psychological evaluation, which was completed in October of 2006 when he was in 8th grade.
All right. I'm going to talk more about your work with Travion and give you a little bit of background about you. Where do you currently live?
I currently live in Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia.
And can you tell me a little bit about your educational background?
I have a doctoral degree in school psychology from the University of Georgia in Athens, Georgia. I completed a postdoctoral internship in child clinical psychology at the University of Maryland Hospital in Baltimore. I have 40 years of experience working with children and families in schools, mental health, and private practice settings, and I am now happily retired.
And you said that you looked at, I think you told us how long you looked at Longview. How long in doing it did you work as a school psychologist in particular?
About half of my career of 40 years was working in the schools. I worked for about 12 or 15 years in private practice, and the balance of that in community mental health settings.
And let's talk about when did you first become aware of Travion?
Travion matriculated to Longview as a sixth grade student from our elementary school parallel program, where he had been placed after he completed 6 months of residential treatment at the Wright School. So I first came to know him in the school year 2004 and 5 when he was a sixth grader.
And as part of, did there come a time when you were asked to do an evaluation of him?
Yes, under state and federal special education laws, all students are required to be reevaluated every 3 years. And for Travion, that came due in the fall of his 8th grade year. His IEP, or Individual Educational Plan team, was concerned because we felt that his progress he had made was not sufficient. He was beginning to show more emotional withdrawal, more significant kinds of distress in terms of his emotional and social adjustment. So they asked that I would do a more comprehensive evaluation with him, which I completed in October of 2006.
Jan, if I may approach?
Yes.
I'm showing you what has been marked as Defendant's Exhibit number 19. Do you recognize this?
Yes, this is a copy of the report that I wrote about Travion's evaluation in 2006.
All right. Thank you. And you have a copy of that report with you?
I do.
Okay. And I may be asking, and in the last few years, have you had a chance to review?
Only in the last few weeks. This became a part of Travion's school record, and when I left the school in 2012, I no longer had contact with him or had copies of the record.
When, in preparing a report such as this, there's one of the things that you do is find out history of a person. Is that one of the things that you do in evaluating one of your students?
Yes, typically a part of a reevaluation report would involve a review of the student's records from the time that they entered school in kindergarten up until the time the evaluation was being completed. Another part of the background information would involve an interview with the parent. In this case, that interview was conducted by our school social worker, and I had her written report also in addition to the other school records to review as I prepared my report.
And from doing that report, were you able to learn some things about programs that have been done for Travion in the past?
Yes, I had the history of the various treatment programs that Travion had been placed in the past, as that history was given by his father and reflected in his school records.
Okay. Did you learn about whether he'd ever been hospitalized for any types of psychiatric problems?
Yes, Travion had several psychiatric hospitalizations. He actually first became involved with the mental health.
All right, overruled. You may testify as to what's in your report about, and specifically listen to the question, answer the question, and if you'll limit your answers to what is being asked.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Travion was hospitalized, 3 times during his elementary school years. And then in his 5th grade year, he was placed, as I said, at the Wright School, which was a state residential treatment facility. He was hospitalized again in February of 2005 during his 6th grade year.
And did you learn anything about things that he had been diagnosed with previously?
Travion had a variety of early diagnoses, beginning at age 6 when he first became involved in the mental health system. He was diagnosed as having attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, commonly known as ADHD. He was also diagnosed as having oppositional defiant disorder and depressive disorder. Those diagnoses followed him through his treatment at the Wright School when he was in 5th grade, and he took a variety of medications for those 3 disorders throughout his elementary school years.
You remember what types of medications that he took?
Initially, when he was first diagnosed, he was placed on Concerta, which is a time-released form of Ritalin for the ADHD symptoms. He took Prozac for depression, and he was prescribed Zyprexa, which was an atypical antipsychotic that was used to treat depression in children. When he was at the Wright School in 5th grade, he was taking Dexedrine and Concerta for ADHD and Wellbutrin and Prozac for depression.
As a result of these different diagnoses, was he ever placed in classes for students with behavioral or emotional disorders?
Yes, Travion was in separate setting, self-contained classes for students with behavioral and emotional disorders throughout his school career. He was initially identified in kindergarten and served in separate setting classes in elementary school, and then when he moved to middle school, he was at Longview, which is a public, separate special education school serving only students with IEPs.
Are you aware that whether he ever attended anything like a wilderness camp?
Yes, Travion was placed at Three Springs Wilderness Camp in September of 2005 for a brief time. It was reported by his father to our school social worker that he withdrew him after he visited the camp and found that Travion's clothes were soiled and dirty, and so he brought him home at that point.
Were you aware of any other programs from your review of the records where his father had withdrawn him from the programs?
Yes, Travion was placed in April of 2005 at Dominion Healthcare Group Home, and his father withdrew him after a few weeks from that setting as well.
I think that you had said that in this process, you did not personally interview his father, is that correct?
I had 2 meetings with his father to review his IEP and to go over the findings of my evaluation, but I did not personally interview his father to get the social history.
And so that was something that and is that normal in your profession to
Yes,
rely
that
on?
would have been a division of responsibilities.
In learning, and in addition to hospitalizations, did you learn about outpatient care with Travion where there had been some instability with who the case managers were?
Yes, I don't know that I have all of the specific programs and therapists, but there were 3 or 4 various agencies that Travion was served by, and services were discontinued because the therapist left the agency or the father was displeased with the services they were receiving. So to the best of my knowledge, Travion never received the longer-term care that he needed.
Okay. And did you learn some about his family background in terms of like where his mother had been in his life?
The report that his father gave to us at that time was that Travion's mother had abandoned him at age 2, and that Travion had had limited contact with his mother over his early childhood years. At the age of almost 14, when I evaluated Travion, his mother had initiated some contact, and he had had a few visits with her at that time.
And again, the source of that information
Was his father and Travion himself.
Talking about going in with Travion, as a result of your findings and your evaluations, did you make recommendations about the type of treatments that he needed?
Yes, I did. I felt it was essential that Travion receive ongoing and intensive treatment to develop a relationship with a therapist that could stick with him over a period of time. And I felt in my report I recommended that that be at least a year and preferably 2 or 3 years in duration. And I also recommended that the treatment would take place in a residential treatment setting where the emotions and behaviors that would result from the issues that arose in treatment could be addressed and maintained.
Let me ask you this. You made those recommendations, and who, when you make the recommendations, who receives the recommendations that you make?
The recommendations went to Travion's treatment team at school, as well as to the mental health agency that he was involved with at the time.
And your recommendation for long-term treatment that sounded and included inpatient type treatments?
Residential treatment.
Residential treatments. Are you aware whether that happened?
To my knowledge, that did not take place.
Are you aware what type of treatment he got instead?
When Travion left Longview School, he was placed in a day treatment program for adolescents called Puzzle Pieces. It was a relatively new treatment and was supposed to provide more emotional and mental health support than was possible for us to provide in the school setting.
After how long did you continue to see Travion after making this report?
I made this report in the fall of his 8th grade year. He completed that school year at Longview and matriculated to 9th grade. And then his 9th grade year, he was placed at Puzzle Pieces, and I have not seen him since that time.
I may have a moment, Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon.
When you're doing this psychoeducational evaluation, you said it's more comprehensive. Were you able to review the records from his prior school years, that is, his history up until that part?
Yes, I had at my disposal all of the records from the Wake County Public School System.
And as early as kindergarten, teachers had concerns about his ability to perform let me ask it in this way. As early as kindergarten, teachers had indicated that he was able to participate in class, but sometimes was not willing or not attentive enough. Is that safe to say?
I don't know those words specifically, but he was initially referred for special education consideration during his kindergarten year.
But during the elementary school years, were you able to see report cards and things of that nature where teachers would comment that he, if he was focused, would be able to perform on task?
I don't remember the specific report cards because this was 9 years ago,
Sure.
but if they were in the records, then I'm sure I saw them at that time.
And that's somewhat consistent with a child who has ADHD and has some issues with being focused and paying attention.
Exactly.
And in addition to those, that your testing in terms of reviewing the records and or the records that you did was that he didn't have any, he wasn't below average in terms of cognition or things of that nature, correct?
No, Travion had 3 intellectual evaluations over the course of his school career, and at all times his intellectual abilities were in the average range.
And some of the earlier teachers, either from the Wright School or from Longview, described him as bright. Is
Yes,
that safe to say, kind of given your interaction and review?
yes.
And you even indicated in your observations and impressions in this case that Travion is willing to do and is dependent upon the incentives and consequences, what he's willing to do, sorry.
Yes.
Okay. And so you had indicated that he is willing to give good effort if there's something in it for him, were your words.
Those were my words.
Okay. And you even said that in your reviewing the results and an interpretation that the kind of therapy that you were recommending, that is sort of the long-term therapy, I'm looking at your page 7, would be helpful because he had good verbal abilities and good insight.
That was my conclusion at that time.
Okay. And to be clear, since this time you've had no real interaction with him?
I have not.
And you were asked some questions about being removed from services by the father in the case. And your testimony was that you didn't kind of get the background information from him, but he was at least present during the time frame when you would explain your report.
Right, and he received a copy of this report.
Right. And in looking through the information that you had received up to that point, that is the prior records, the history gained by the social worker, it was your impression that Travion's father had his best interests at heart, correct?
Yes.
And he might not have made the right steps, but you felt like he had his best interest.
I don't think he was intentionally trying to do Travion any harm.
And in your experience with residential treatment, and just to be clear, when we're talking about residential treatment, so the jury understands, that's where you go to a place and you stay, and it's not day that you go home at night. You stay for a period of time.
Exactly.
And is that sort of the first recourse for a child, that is, that you would recommend residential right off the bat?
No, it is not.
And typically it's after students or children have tried other things that just don't seem to be working.
Exactly.
Or they have a condition in which you feel like long-term is more beneficial and more structured for them.
Yes, ma'am.
And as a school psychologist, is it not true that once you've walked through those steps, that referring a child to residential treatment could also be something that might be covered by, for example, Medicaid, once you've gotten to that point?
That's been my experience, yes.
Question, Dr. Evans, another one of your interpretations from your test results and your reviewing of records was that in social situations, and I'm looking at page 5 if that helps. In social situations, Travion's not able to understand, in social situations, he's not able to understand the components of the conflict, but tends to react globally and often out of proportion to the situation.
May I read the sentences
Sure.
that precede that to give it context?
Yes.
This was a part of what I wrote based on my evaluation of Travion's cognitive abilities. And one of the things that I learned in that was that he lacked the ability to break a problem down into its component parts. And what I wrote was these cognitive deficits may contribute to Travion's behavior problems in that he is not able to think through a problem or to understand the verbal reasoning of the adult who is trying to talk with him. Likewise, in social situations, he's not able to understand the components of the conflict, but tends to react globally and often out of proportion to the situation.
So in a social setting, he might react out of proportion.
Right. He would show more temper, perhaps, than what the situation merited.
I don't have any further questions.
Is and saying and reaching those conclusions, was that based on the fact that his bonding was impaired?
Yes. It was a combination of his history and his cognitive functioning and his ability to form relationships and understand consequences.
Let me ask you a couple questions about residential treatment. Is it sometimes appropriate for residential treatment if the home cannot provide the necessary structure?
Yes.
Is residential treatment something that was recommended lightly by you?
No. And Travion had participated in residential treatment previously when he was at the Wright School. It is a special school where children live at school during the week. They do come home on the weekends. And he was there for 6 months during his 5th grade year and made good improvement. So that was part of what led me to believe that similar treatment would be successful.
But despite the efforts of the team, you were not able to find an appropriate residential program?
We were not at that time.
You asked about that his IQ was pretty much average.
Very much. He was tested 3 times and his scores were consistently average.
Is there anything inconsistent with having an average IQ and having mental problems?
No. Many people who have mental illness have average or above average in intellectual capacity.
Mr. Kidd, I think. Thank you. Further evidence?
We do have further evidence, Your Honor. Place your left
Thank you,
hand-
sir.
Very good, thank you.
Please stand. Place your left hand on the Bible
Left hand.
and raise your right, please. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you, sir. Please be seated.
Mr. Brown?
Okay. Could you please tell the jury your name?
Wesley Johnson.
Okay. And where do you currently live?
I live in Raleigh,
And how long have you lived in Raleigh?
about approximately 5 years now.
5 years. And where were you living before that?
Actually, Chapel Hill. Prior to that, I was living in Memphis before I came back to North Carolina.
And what is your current occupation?
I am a parenting facilitator. I train parents.
And how long have you acted in that capacity?
Well, I've been a coach and teacher for more than 30 years, but I've been doing parenting facilitation for about 6 years, 5 or 6 years now.
Do you know Travion?
I do.
How do you know Travion?
I work with Travion at Puzzle Piece Day Treatment from around January 2007 to somewhere around July, August 2009.
Is when you worked for the program?
When I worked for Puzzle Piece, yes.
Yes, you work with Puzzle Pieces. Tell me a little bit what Puzzle Pieces is.
Puzzle Piece is simply a day treatment program for adjudicated youth.
Adjudicated youth. Did any of the folks that attended that program, did they ever, any of them have mental health problems?
Most of them did.
What do you remember about Travion?
The first thing is that Trey and I had almost a father-son relationship while we were together. To be honest with you, I had a lot of students my time there. I was there from 2007 to 2010. I must admit that he was one of my favorite people.
He's one of your favorites?
Favorite? Yes, he was.
Why was that?
Simply, he was, of course, he loved basketball. I'm an ex-basketball player and coach, so we had that in common. But also, he was just a kind, loving, respectful kid.
You said that a lot of the kids come from different types of problems. Was that unusual to have those characteristics that you're talking about at the program?
No.
No. But it was something about him that you said that sort of stood out.
The fact that what stood out about Trey, of course, that he was a big kid. He was always playing, goofing around, and he was also very protective of the adults in the program. He came in with an attitude that he wanted to do the right thing, and we all admired that about him.
What did you remember about his father?
I remember his father coming in, wanting to be a part, wanting to help, but literally didn't know how. And I could relate to him with my own son, because there were things about my sons growing up that if I had known better, probably would have acted differently. And I think his dad needed some parenting facilitation, some parenting skills. Though he was trying to help his son, I believe he really wanted to help his son. Just didn't have the skills.
He didn't have the skills.
Yeah.
And how often would you see his?
His dad? You said?
How often would you see his dad? Yeah.
Probably at least once a month, or because we had a treatment team meeting every 30 days.
All right. Thank you. No further questions.
Cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Johnson, good afternoon to you,
Good.
sir.
How you doing?
Good. You mentioned that youth's become a part of your program, adjudicated youths become a part of your program. What do you mean by that, sir?
What about, usually it's having some difficulty with the courts, adjudicated, delinquent, or having problems in school.
So it's court ordered that they be a part of your program, or a part of the Puzzle Pieces program?
I think in some instances it were, but I think most of our referrals came from schools.
Well, how about Travion's case? Was it court ordered that he was to be there?
I'm not sure, but I don't think so.
And he was there he was in your program for over 2 years, 2.5 years?
Well,
right?
From, if I recall correctly, January 2007 to about July 2009.
Okay. All right. And he was successful in your program, sir?
Yes.
Okay. And his father was part of your program as well?
Yes, his father was a part of the treatment team.
Okay. And
He was a stakeholder, of course, because
And it's your testimony that his father participated in that team and part of this program.
yes, as far as being a treatment team member and participant, yes.
Yes, sir.
When was the last time you saw Travion, Mr. Johnson?
To be honest with you, cannot recall the last time I saw Travion other than in the program. I don't think I saw him outside of the program after I left in 2010.
And didn't speak to him on the phone, letters, anything like that?
No.
Since 2009?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I don't have any further questions.
Mr. Brown?
A couple questions. Was it your impression that Mr. Clark was willing to listen to you because he respected you?
Absolutely.
And you're aware, you think it's possible, though, he did not attend all the meetings?
Oh, you mean
Mr. Clark?
Mr. Clark. Now, would you ask me that again? Because
Is it possible that Mr. Clark was not attending all the meetings that were supposed to be there at Puzzle?
Well, I can't recall, but whether or not he did or not attend all the meetings, that's just not something I can answer without documentation.
So if he missed meetings, that would not surprise you?
What other mitigating circumstances, I don't know. But I can't recall whether or not he missed a meeting or not right off my top of my head.
Okay.
I can't recall that.
All right. All right. Well, thank you.
Okay.
Anything further? All right. Thank you, sir. You
Thank
can
you.
step down.
Mhm.
The defense calls Heather Lord.
Please stand for me.
You stand up, please.
Do you swear that the testimony you give this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Ms. Brown?
Good afternoon. Could you please tell the jury your name?
My name is Heather Lord.
And how do you know Travion?
Travion was in my program, puzzle piece programs that we ran for at-risk youth.
I'm going to ask you more about Puzzle Piece in a second, just some background. Where do you currently live?
In Raleigh,
And how long have you lived in Raleigh?
26 years.
You're not originally from Raleigh, are you?
No,
Where are you from?
I'm originally from England.
Okay. And what is your current job?
I'm a general contractor, actually, focusing on modifying homes for people with disabilities. A lot of ALS, Parkinson's, VA veterans.
Before you had that job, what was your role in Puzzle Pieces?
I started it. It was my program. I was the executive director.
Could you tell me a little bit about Puzzle Pieces?
Long story short, we were foster parents for at-risk youth for many years, and we could never find the right services for them. So the idea was to create a program where if they were suspended from school and they were struggling, they could go and get help. So that's really where Puzzle Piece came from. So we created a unique program where all of our kids had partner teams, so they would have a male and female partner, kind of to give them the idea of, parenting. And we had a lot of other programs that we came up with, art therapy and all sorts of stuff. We also had live school. We contracted with Wake County Special Ed Department to provide them with schooling. We were the only day treatment to do this because we felt so strongly that while they were out of school, they needed help so that when they went back in, they wouldn't be so far behind.
How did the program work? Was this something that people did after school, or was it something that done in replacement for school at the time?
Specifically, we had children that had been suspended from school. The criteria was that they had to have a mental health diagnosis in order to come.
So that was the requirement, a mental health
Yes.
diagnosis? It wasn't that anything having to be ordered by the courts or
No.
anything like that with it? And what did they do, what sorts of things you do in your program to sort of integrate mental health and education?
Well, they would do separate. Education was completely separate. We hired teachers to teach live, and then they would kind of rotate through different types of things like rec therapy. We would go out sometimes into the community. We would kind of have the kids go to some of the senior centres and do crafts with the seniors. It worked really well. The seniors loved the kids and the kids loved the seniors. We had art, music, just a lot of different things just to kind of work alongside them. And then they had rewards. They were on different levels according to their behaviour.
Is Puzzle Piece still in existence?
No.
Why not?
Because after we got our accreditation from COA, the state decided to implement CABA, which stands for Critical Access Behavioural Health Agency. What that meant was instead of just being able to focus on day treatment, we had to take on several other services to provide a continuum of care. And we had never wanted to do that. We didn't know this was coming. We had no idea, but we just really wanted to focus on day treatment. That's where we felt we were really useful and we could help kids. To make a long story short, we went through the CABA process, but we just didn't have the finances to hire all these extra staff before we would get reimbursed. So we ended up losing pretty much everything.
Do you remember Travion being in the program?
Yes.
What do you remember about Travion?
He was always smiling. He was happy. He was a little goofy, just fun. I mean, my memories of Travion, he was fun.
Did you have any difficult kids at Puzzle Pieces?
Yes.
Was Travion one of them?
No.
Was he respectful to you?
Always.
What about to the other adults in the program?
Yes.
You got to see him in the program. Would you say he was immature for his age?
Yes.
Could you explain that?
I mean, Travion had to come from a rough background, and so it's kind of really typical for kids to be immature, you know, when they've struggled so hard. So I think no more than that. He was eager to please.
Did you see him with his peers at the program? Would you describe him as a follower?
Yes.
Could you explain that?
I mean, from what I remember, well, from what I know of Travion, he was, in my observation, like a sponge. He was really eager to please people. He just wanted to make you happy. I mean, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, but I have 3 dogs, and all they want to do is please me. They want to please me, and that is how Travion was. He did want to please people.
Did you ever see any signs of violence from him?
No.
If I may have a moment. In Puzzle Pieces, did you ever get a chance to meet the people's families?
Oh yes, I usually interviewed them because I ended up being, obviously I was the director, so I ended up not being able to work with the kids as much as I wanted to, but I always interviewed families, before they came into the program.
Did you have a lot of contact with Michael Clark, Travion's dad?
No.
You did not have a lot of contact with him?
Mm-mm.
Was that unusual for you not to have that contact with kids?
Unfortunately, yes, no. I mean, a lot of times parents didn't seem to want to participate. They found their kids too much trouble and they wanted us to fix them. But that's where our partner teams really came into their own. They would be at the treatment team meetings with everybody on the team. And I would assume that Mr. Clark came to some of those meetings, but I wasn't present during them.
Ever meet any other members of his family? Do you think Travion felt safe and secure at Puzzle Pieces?
I think he did, yes.
All right. All right. Thank you. No further questions.
Cross-examination.
Yes, thank you. Ms. Lord, good afternoon. When you provided the school-type setting services, did you get the records from, say, the Wake County Public Schools where the defendant had been?
Yeah, we would get their IEP.
Okay. And would you get, in terms of, you said that the kids that came to your program had been suspended from school, and so it was your understanding that he had been suspended from school?
Mostly due to sort of, some kind of mental health disorder. A lot of times ADD or ADHD, where kids find it extremely hard to concentrate. Often that can exhibit itself in clown-like behavior, just trying to draw attention because they may be not understanding what's being taught to them.
Well, it can exhibit itself in clown-like behavior, but it also can exhibit itself in violence against other students. Isn't that safe to say?
Yeah.
Okay. And so were you made aware of the background of Travion's suspensions?
I believe I was, yes.
And one of them primarily in 2007, which would have been shortly before he enrolled in your program, was that he was suspended for 10 days for disrupting, causing a disruption in the hallway of Longview, and the school had to be put on lockdown. Did they tell you that?
I don't recall.
Okay. And that he was yelling profanity in the halls. You don't recall that?
I don't. I mean, I'm not trying to avoid it,
Yeah.
but I had hundreds of children come through there, so certain details I literally won't remember.
Okay. And so then were you aware that during his time at Longview in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade that he was suspended for multiple times for punching students, pushing students, and fighting with children?
No.
And your interaction, because you were the sort of the head of the program, was you didn't have as much one-on-one interaction with the parents once the children were accepted into the program. Folks like Mr. Johnson would have had more contact.
Correct.
I don't have any further questions.
Mr. Brown.
May we have just a second, Your Honor?
Some of the reasons for suspension, did you know about it? He was also would get in trouble for things like refusing to do his work in classroom, and
I mean, that was more, yeah, I did know about the classroom work because that was kind of where we were focusing on, yes.
doing that. And that when his father was called about it, that he was told to call Travion's social worker and the therapist.
Right.
Anyway. Thank you. I have no further questions.
Anything further? Thank you, ma'am. You may step down. Is there further evidence for the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. We call Carrie Hebert.
Place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right, please. Do you swear the testimony you give this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you, ma'am. Please be seated.
Mr. Brown?
Ms. Hebert, could you tell the jury your name?
Carrie Hebert?
I'm sorry, Hebert.
No, that's fine.
Do you know Travion?
I do.
How do you know him?
He was a partner with Coach and myself at the Puzzle Piece program.
Okay, and Coach is, his full name is Mr. Johnson?
Oh, Wes Johnson, I'm sorry.
Yes. I'm going to ask you some more questions about your work with Travion in a second. Just going to get some background from you. Where do you live?
I live in Holly Springs,
And how long have you lived in Holly Springs?
8 years.
And where do you currently work?
I work for a contractor in town.
Before you did that, were you involved in doing social work?
I was.
And where did you go to college?
Western Michigan University.
Was there a time that you worked for Puzzle Pieces?
Yes.
How long did you work there?
2.5 years.
We've heard a little bit about Puzzle Pieces, but I want to make sure that I got all the information. How many kids would you work with at a time in your program?
On a caseload between 11 and 13,
And about how old were the kids at that time?
between 12 and 17.
And were all the kids that you were looking at, were they all the same age? Were the ages?
It was a
right?
split age.
A split age?
Yeah.
Could you explain
yeah.
what that means?
They could be anywhere between 12 and 17, so we had a mixture of ages.
Okay. At the same, with your group,
Yes.
with it. And were you involved in it? You said you were involved with a team with Coach?
Yes.
Okay. When you were there, were the kids at Puzzle Pieces, did a lot of them have mental health problems?
The majority of them did, yes.
Was that one of the requirements to get into the program?
It was.
Do you remember the specific mental health problems that Travion had?
I don't know.
From your observations of him and all, did you see any signs that he may have been suffering from attention deficit disorder, often called ADHD?
Definitely.
Could you explain that?
Very impulsive, not easily able to focus. He needed to be told a few times to sort of follow directions. So that would be kind of what I would think is ADHD.
When you, we've heard testimony that you would meet with the parents, different family members. Did you ever have a chance to meet with Michael Clark?
I did.
I'm going to talk more about him in a second, but did you ever meet with Travion's mother?
I did not.
Have you, as far as you know, have you ever met her?
I've never met her, no.
What about Travion's stepmother
Maybe one time.
with it? How regularly would you all have meetings?
At least every 2 weeks to 1 month.
Are these meetings that you have, are these things that are supposed to be optional for the family?
No, they were supposed to be a requirement.
To ask you a little bit about, did you observe anything about Michael Clark at these meetings?
Mm-hmm.
What did you notice about his eye contact?
There wasn't a whole lot, very flat affect, and that was if he decided to come to a meeting, and oftentimes we would have to remind him that we're going to have a meeting today, and he may or may not show up.
But he did not show up to every meeting.
Right.
Could you see anything during these meetings that you saw about the father-son bond that was going on?
There was no bond, no relationship, if that's what you're asking.
Yes. Could you explain why you reached that conclusion?
I guess just based on the fact that he normally wouldn't even look at Travion. He would come to a meeting possibly and sit, and Coach or Wes Johnson and myself would kind of discuss the either progress or regression and what our next steps were. Weren't a whole lot of questions from Dad, not a lot of comments, not a lot of positive reinforcement. So we did most of the talking.
Did, this was during the day, did the kids bring their lunch?
Yes, they were supposed to.
Did Travion always bring his lunch?
No, almost never.
How did he eat?
Coach and myself oftentimes would bring food. He might ask another kid for food.
Was this something you thought he was doing intentionally?
No.
Why do you say that?
I guess because Dad knew that that was part of the program, that they were supposed to eat lunch. We all ate lunch together, and that was something that was required by the families to provide the lunch for them to bring and eat.
Did you ever notice anything about Travion's hygiene?
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell us what you noticed about that?
He wasn't always as clean, I guess, as I would think he could be. Sometimes he would wear the same clothing, just not real well kept all the time.
About how old was Travion during the time he was at the program?
Working with us?
Yeah, with you.
15.
He was 15 at the time. And so was the way he was, his hygiene at that time, was that normal for 15-year-olds that you had seen?
Maybe, but then to come in, several days in a row in the same clothes was not usual.
Was Travion mature or immature?
I would say he was fairly immature.
How did Travion get along with the younger kids in the program? You said it was a mixed group of kids.
Mm-hmm. I feel like he got along fairly well with them.
Did he ever do anything for them?
He was very compassionate. I feel like if we had a newer person to the program or somebody who was having an issue, he had a pretty decent heart where he would sort of talk with them to make it okay.
Were older kids able to manipulate him?
Definitely.
Did you see examples of that?
Sometimes, yes. I mean, he was easily persuaded, easily talked into things. And I think the impulsivity kind of added to that.
Do you remember how long when Travion quit being in the program?
I think 2009, the end of 2009.
Would it have been in January of 2009?
Yes.
Was that in the middle of the school year?
It was, yes. Or maybe the beginning of a new school year, yeah.
Was it kind of your memory of that being sort of an abrupt leaving of the program?
Definitely, yeah. He was actually making really good progress, and we had a treatment team meeting, and then suddenly Dad decided that the program wasn't working for them and Travion was to leave. So Dad pulled him from the program.
I may have a moment.
Yes. Examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Hebert?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, make sure I said it right. You're testifying today based on memory, is that correct?
Yes.
And so you don't have any records or documentation of these meetings that happened or anything like that? Because our understanding is Puzzle Pieces is no longer in existence. Is that-
Exactly.
okay. And so what you're testifying to is your memory?
Yes.
And you said that Travion was easily manipulated, but didn't give us an example. Could you give us an example?
I guess the one thing that comes to mind would be when they were dropped off in the morning to check into the program, our requirement was they had to stay on property grounds. They couldn't go across the street. So if there were kids there and said, hey, you know, let's go to the store or something like that, that's kind of the thing I was talking about.
And so a group of kids would go together?
Sometimes.
Okay. But my question is, what evidence was that Travion was led? Did some older kid tell him, let's go, and you watched him go?
Yeah, or I had heard from maybe one of the kids on my caseload that they walked across the street.
And so from your own experience, can you give us an example of a time that you saw someone manipulate Travion specifically?
Not off the top of my head, no.
And the children that came to Puzzle Piece in that time, many of them had been suspended from school in addition to obviously the requirement that they have some sort of mental health issue, correct?
Right.
And were you aware that Travion had come to you because of being suspended from school?
Mm-hmm.
And were you aware of some of the surroundings of him being suspended in 2007?
I don't remember now, no.
You don't remember now, or you don't know at the time?
I knew at the time, and now I don't remember, no.
And did you know that the police had to be called and the school was put on lockdown because of his behavior? Do you recall that?
No, I don't.
And the meetings that you described with the lack of bond between the defendant and his fathers, those were the same meetings that Mr. Johnson would have attended. You all did them as a team, correct?
Yes, we did.
I don't have any further questions.
Do you recall that the reason the school was put on lockdown with Travion was because he was running down the hall making a ruckus?
I don't.
Okay. No more questions.
Anything further, Mr. Kita? All right, thank you, ma'am. You may step down.
Your Honor.
We would like to publish some items that were previously admitted. We have multiple copies of the 2 documents, and then there, I believe, are 1 or 2 photos that were also admitted earlier, but we did not publish previously. We just thought we'd wait and publish everything at once.
All right.
So that's the remainder.
So what exhibit numbers are you intending to publish?
If I can walk up to Madam Clerk, Your Honor.
Yes.
We are intending to publish defendants 17, 18, along with defendant 16. So defendant 16, 17, and 18. And if it's helpful for the court in terms of the item 16 is a picture that we would ask just to be passed for all the jurors to have to view, and defendants 17 and 18, we have provided copies for each juror. There were 2 that were admitted and published yesterday. Those were 13 and 15. And the witness didn't recognize him at the age he was at 14, and so we did not admit
That's
that.
fine. No, I'm just making sure that my notes are correct. So 16, 17, and 18 have all been admitted.
Have all been
and I just
admitted.
was confirming about the clerk. All right. Do you have any further witnesses that you intend to call?
No, sir.
All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to provide these documents to you through the bailiff. if you pass the picture around, which is Exhibit 16, and then take as much time as you care to review Exhibit 17 and 18. Recall that those will be taken back from you after you've reviewed them, so if you do wish to make any notes about anything you're reading, be sure you do so in your notebooks. Once we complete that, we're going to recess for the day. I'll give you further information about the schedule that we have for the remaining few days. But so once you are completed with your review, if you'll just look up or somehow so that when I look at all of you, I can tell that all of you have had the opportunity to complete your review of these records. All right, so bailiff, if you would distribute those records. Go ahead and take a 10-minute recess. If you'll just leave those materials in your chair, it may take you a bit longer to review those. So rather than keeping you here until that time, let's just take a break. 10 minutes. Recall all the rules and instructions. Don't talk about the case among yourselves. Leave all your materials in your chairs.